Small talk activity. Put the students into pairs and each pair with another group so that they are 4 together. The first pair thinks of the topic and the other pair has to discuss it with each other for 1 minute. You can change the amount of time depending on the level of the students. This is a great activity because you don't need to prepare anything and the learners pick the topics. Make sure to get feedback from your students. Ask them if they heard anything funny or interesting. It's worth doing this so students can see that their experience of an activity has value. Hobby expert. Each person has something that they're very good at. Let each student pick a hobby or skill that they are proud of and quickly write down a few notes how to become very good at that hobby. Then they have to explain to a partner step by step how to get good at that skill. Make sure that they include at least 5 steps and no sleeping or playing video games. When done, ask the students what their partner has taught them. Use phones. We have one of the best resources in the world at our fingertips. When I start class, I often ask my students to take out their phones and find a photo they have taken recently. Then they have to share the story of the photo in small groups. Social media like Instagram is blooming and learners really want to share their lives with other people. Most are so happy to share something interesting or fun that happened in their very own lives, or just a pretty picture they took of something. It also makes it easier for them to explain what is going on in their lives. You can also encourage the rest of the group to ask them the 5 W's. When was it taken? Who is in the picture? Where? What were you doing? Why? Include these to make this a great activity for adult and advanced learners. Project-based learning, or PBL. Speaking of phones, since most people have internet on their phones, you can ask the students to do some projects together. Pair them up and tell them to present their findings to the class. They are news presenters and they have to find a news story that they will share with the class. But make sure they find the information from an English site. I've done the same thing when I was preparing students for a trip abroad. I asked them to plan a day in the city they were visiting. Their itinerary should include places to go, restaurants to eat at, and activities to do. And remember, push them to use English sources. Most Koreans use the exact same blogs, but we want to expose them to real content instead of translating. It could also be something simple like telling the class that we're going to have a day out. One group has to pick a movie. One group has to plan the transport. How are we going to get there? Another can find a restaurant that we'll eat at. The possibilities are endless. Find something in common. All humans want to form connections with other people. So there is nothing better than to find out what you have in common with a classmate. Challenge your students to have a conversation with a partner and find out what exactly they have in common. It could be that they went to the same vacation spot when they were younger, or they both have 2 sisters. It's even better if it's something exciting or interesting. Give them a couple of minutes to have a conversation, write it down, and then they can share it with the class. You might notice that I insist on getting feedback from the students after every activity. It's because I believe that at this level, you should always have an outcome or a resolution. 250 conversation starters. I found a wonderful list of conversation starters. It has 250 questions that you can ask someone to get a conversation started. I've put the link down below. Cut them out for conversations in class. Students sit in small groups, pick up the question and answer. Just a minute. Most students have an issue with fluency. They speak very slowly and there are often pauses in between their sentences. Just a minute is a great activity to help with fluency. Write down topics on your board. It could be topics that you're already doing in class or ones that you think of on your own. Make sure that there are more topics than you have students. Have students play rock, paper, scissors or pick a number from a jar. The first student comes to the front, they pick a topic and they have to talk about it non-stop for 1 minute. Make sure to emphasize that speed is the most important. You don't care if they make mistakes, but you want them to talk very quickly. Once they're done, you can erase the topic and then the next person comes. Once again, you don't care what they say, but they have to talk real quick for 1 minute. This is great as it shows students that it's not important how many errors they make, but how fluent they can be. Pecha Kucha originated in Tokyo in 2003 and it means chit chat. Students make a presentation on PowerPoint with 10 pictures and they put the slide counter to 10 seconds or 20 depending on the level of your students. When they do their presentation, they have to quickly explain each slide before it disappears. This is a very adaptable activity and you can use it for any topic and is another great activity to improve their fluency. Job interview. We have all done these in class. It's a useful activity because it prepares them for their professional lives. Do it in small groups of 4 where the interviewee will be asked questions by 3 other interviewers. I have never. Students raise their hands, then they have to say something they have never done. If somebody else did it in the group, that person has to put down a finger and then talk about that experience. Try to keep things PG. This is a great way for students to share experiences. Questions to a partner. Make a list of questions for student A and a list of different questions for student B. They ask each other these questions and they get to answer and respond to it. Why is this the best possible one? It's because it maximizes student talking time. And I feel this is the best way to engage the students. Survey. This is a famous activity. You make a list of questions and students have to walk around the class and ask one question to a different person each time. Students love this activity because it allows them to walk around the class and actually talk to some of the friends they haven't really spoken to a lot. Speed dating. You make a list of questions and students sit down with a partner for a minute or 2 and then you ring a bell and then they have to switch partners. What makes this different from a survey is that it's not only one question they have to ask, it's a few questions. And that gives them the opportunity to practice these questions and also these responses. They can also choose which questions they ask their partners. At a more advanced level, I want you to encourage students to ask follow-up questions so that they practice a more natural way of speaking. Running sentences. Students have to continue a sentence or an idea or a story. One student will start with the story and then it stops and then it's the next student and the next student and the next student. This is also used in writing where someone writes the start of a story and someone writes the middle and the end. It's also great for conditionals. If one student says, if I had $1 million, I would be happy. And then another student continues that and says, if I was happy, I would live in a big mansion. Third student, if I lived in a big mansion, I would have a butler. Deserted island. Ask students to draw a picture of something, anything. Once they're finished, tell them that they are on a deserted island and only half of them can survive. They have to try and persuade their friends to pick them. Give them some time to prepare by writing reasons why they should get picked to survive. And then once it's their turn, they should plead their case. Taboo is you give students a word, let's say politics, and then they should try and explain this word to the other students, but they can't use these words. Sometimes you can put it on a projector or you can put it on the screen in front. You show them a word and say, okay, listen, you can't use these words. I prefer using cards. I've got a whole stack of cards that I use. I think it's an easy way to put students into groups. What you want to do with most activities is you want to scaffold it. So what I do is first I start off and I say, okay, everyone, explain this word to your friends and you can use these words to help you. Then after some time, I say, okay, stop. This is way too easy for you guys. Now let's make it a little bit more difficult. I want you to explain this word. Don't use these words. 2 truths and 1 lie. This is a fun activity. You ask students to write down 2 things about themselves that is true and then 1 that is false. Tell them to make it interesting. Don't make it anything boring. For example, when you show students how to do it, you can say, I have 3 brothers. I can't eat seafood and my favorite color is red. Okay, and then the students should actually ask you questions to find out which one is the lie. Tell students not to use the examples you have done. They should try and make their own original ideas. It's easy for them to fall back on, oh, well, I'll just copy the teacher. You should encourage them to use their own. Remember to split them up into groups so that they can practice with their friends. The reason we split students into groups is to maximize talking time. If you use the whole class, then students get bored, it takes too long, they don't really get a chance to do anything. And when students are like that, they're then going to zone out. So you want to engage your students as much as possible by making them part of the activity. When they're in their groups, tell the students to remember to ask each other extra questions to try and find out which one is the lie. For example, if I said I had 3 brothers, they can ask me, what are their names? How old are they? Just to see which ones are true. Alibi. This is a really fun activity. Tell the students that yesterday a crime was committed and they want to find a group of students who is responsible. If you have a class of 20 students, you could make groups of 4, 4, 4, 4, and then an investigator for each. 1, 1, 1, 1. The investigators I usually make the brighter students so that they can start and ask good questions. Give the groups a few minutes to create an alibi, a story and its details. Where were they? What were they doing? At what time? What were they eating? What was the weather like? Once they're done, each of the 4 investigators will interview the group and ask them questions. They can give that group a score. How much do they believe them? To make it easier, you can also write some example questions on the board that the investigators can ask, and they can also come up with their own questions. They will interview each group and then after a few minutes move around so that they interview all the groups. Afterwards, all the detectives should say, which group do they think is responsible? Hot seat. Put the students into groups. Maybe if you have a group of 4 students, one sits out, you tell these 3 students a word or phrase they have to explain. The student turns around and they have to explain it to him or her. What you can do is you can make it more competitive. You can put the groups against each other and give them a list of words they have to run through. Then you'll see who finishes first. It can get a little bit loud, but I think if you set the ground rules, then it should be a lot of fun. If things were different. Place the students into groups. Then they have to think of a celebrity they know and write a list of what that celebrity has achieved. It could be a sports star, a singer, a politician, anyone that's very famous. Walk around and make sure that each group thinks of a different person. Then they report back about their celebrity, his or her accomplishments to the class. You can write the names on the board so that you can see who they've picked. Now, each group has to think of an alternative history for each celebrity. What would have happened if something happened differently in their lives, or if they didn't achieve something that they did? Note that not each alternative history has to end in a disaster. They could just have become something else. When all the groups are done, they report back their alternate histories. The most creative or well-explained history gets a point. If they are a group of 3 or 4 students, make sure that each student gets a chance to explain some of that alternate history. This activity gets the students thinking out of the box, and they also have to use some key grammar forms.